Basically, what I wanted to do is look at New York as if there had been a plan. Europeans think of manifestos, but then don't realize something. But in New York, there was a lot of realization, but no manifesto. Everything starts with a grid, and so anyone thinking about New York has to think about the implications of the grid. And in it was my conviction that the grid, on one hand, is very rigorous and authoritarian, but that in that rigor, it also enables a lot of imagination. Well, now I want to talk about Park Avenue. As I say, it's the kind of first time that we are facing a building on the avenue and facing an office building. Park Avenue is actually extremely interesting in terms of its architecture, some of it very good, some of it very ruthless in terms of maximizing the kind of zoning envelope. This is the site. This is the current situation, and if you look at your ambition, you can see that this doesn't correspond to it. The site is undeniably a kind of wonderful site, but at the same time, I think it's a site that is pulled in two directions, both to the north and to the south. If it were a little bit more to the north, it would be closer to Central Park, and a little bit further to the south, it would be kind of more emphatically part of Midtown. And so we then started to kind of look at shapes that were perhaps expressing that, articulating that double pool. We actually kind of proposed that the building could consist of three cubes. You see number 1, number 2, and number 3. That would be kind of rotated 45 degrees toward each other. So the bottom cube is kind of basically on Park Avenue and off Park Avenue. Then the middle one is half rotated, and the top one rotates in the two directions. Here you see the scale. It also gives a kind of certain refinement. It follows the kind of pyramidal archetype of New York. But because of the rotation, it's not so predictable, and in its volume alone offers a kind of pleasing delicacy in spite of its size. Here you see the effect kind of simply with light. Therefore, in the vertical sections, you have kind of even light, but every time in the in-between sections, you see the kind of shading. Almost as if there's a kind of corkscrew movement of the entire building. I will show you kind of very quickly a journey around the building to show how something which is actually very simple has a very surprising amount of kind of different silhouettes. So basically it's all kind of standardized elements and standardized details. But what that implies is that basically, and here you see the kind of thing in foreshortened, it means that basically here you see the kind of warped effect based on the same standardized elements. But here you see the effect of it would be that you have a kind of smooth part and then slightly kind of three-dimensional, so it almost looks like scales, and then smooth, and then kind of scales again. Here you see how it would look from the south, and you see it's kind of building that by having this, it's not only kind of addressing Park Avenue, but actually also the major intersection at 57th Street, and therefore almost as if it is stepping out of line, even though it's strictly staying in line. And then I want to end my part of the kind of presentation with the building here inside New York, obviously kind of very good and to some extent conventional neighbor, but with kind of sufficient difference to not only be remarked, but also to play a positive role of introducing something new after a very long time in New York. In essence, what we try to do We try to, and I kind of wrote it in text, it's a kind of diagram at the same time of beauty and of efficiency. Yeah? So we try to combine and be as close as possible on both scales. Slendern is first. This is the building as it is. And this is the building also as it is. There are two ways of making it taller. One is to proportionally stretch it. And the second one that we explored is to essentially leave the lower part, the lower, let's say 80%, and to make the top part taller. And we don't know exactly what we prefer, but therefore I want to share with you a number of comparisons. So every time on the left you see the building as it was. In the middle you see the stretched version, and on the right you see the version where only the top part is taller. And I put my cards on the table. I actually thought the low version was extremely beautiful because it has a kind of coiled energy and as if it wants to be released. This is perhaps also an interesting thing to consider. This is the way it was, and the skyscrapers in New York that it then would relate to. And this is the way it could be in the stretched version, and the skyscrapers it would relate to. So you basically, I mean, there are not really categories in New York, but you go from a tall building really to a tower. Lightness. This is what we presented. I think that the brownishness and darkness was not really a specific intention, so the building can obviously be lighter. Here you see what we presented. Here you see it kind of taller and lighter, and here you see what it could be with this kind of platinum aura over it. And of course, the main quality of the building is that all its facets are not exposed in the same way, so that the slightest difference in exposure then has an add-on effect on the variety and differentiation of the building. This is what we showed, and this is then how it could be. But these are in between techniques where the comfort of the user is completely guaranteed, and still the integrity of the shape is also asserted. And I like the ambiguity of material that it also introduces. What I find beautiful about this section of Park Avenue, that it is commercial, but it also has a gravitas and a kind of civic, at least, sense. What we decided to do is to cut the remaining part of the existing building, to cut it loose of the cores, and to create a kind of zone in between, a kind of atrium zone in between, which in our view has the exciting consequence that both the top and the bottom are connected by a kind of public entity. What is very appealing, I think, about a building that opens is that it proclaims its openness. And you see here also the kind of relationship between the open part, it could be an art space or just a meeting space, and the enclosed box, which is the lobby proper. Here you see that slot, kind of basically it will have traffic going from the existing building into the core. And there you see that actually the slot itself is also a feature for the building as a whole. Here you look from the middle and see how these islands, the kind of rigorous organization, create also a kind of sense of space. My strongest argument for the building remains that in a city which is almost dying of generic shapes, but which also doesn't need kind of needless extravagance, it is a kind of beautiful in-between of something that has not happened before, but that is still very polite toward everything which is there.